All right, Shaun, the last thing that we are going to talk about today is college football as a whole. And what we're going to talk about today are what are some of the surprise teams or sleeper teams in 2025 that could make some noise. I don't know if there's going to be an Indiana from 2024. Now, I don't know how you took this as, but I looked at it both ways. When I took surprise teams, I thought of teams that could play above what some people are expecting. And I also looked at it some teams that have the opportunity to dip a little bit below of what some of the expectations were. So I looked at it twofold because for every IU that there was last season, you had IU, you had Arizona State, you also had Florida State, you also had Oklahoma State. Now, I don't think anybody was talking about Oklahoma State being a playoff contender, but they competed for the Big 12 championship in 2023, and last season they finished the year 3-9. And so I looked at it both ways, but I'll kick it over to you first. Do you have, or I know you do, but what are some of the teams that you have on your list for surprise teams in this upcoming season?
So by surprise, I think I put this in a category of teams that are coming off of disappointing seasons that people might have forgotten about, that people might say, that these teams might say, hey, don't trip. This isn't a trend. We just had a blip on the radar. And so in saying that, I like a lot of what Florida State did, especially in the portal, especially at the skill positions. Their recruiting class for the last 2 years in the defensive backfield has been absolutely superb. And they made some coaching changes that I feel like were necessary. And so kudos to that. Do I fully trust them to be a surprise team that makes it into the college football playoff? I think it's going to be difficult in that ACC with Louisville, what I expect from them, what I expect from Clemson, and what I expect for SMU. I think it's difficult. So I think they had a chance, but I'm not sure. Colorado could be seen as a surprise. I think they were seen as a surprise last year. So if they make it to the playoff, I think that would be definitely surprising. But I'm going to go with the team. Arizona State was a huge surprise last year for a lot of people. I don't know if they can be considered as a surprise. But I'm going to go to Cal Whittingham and Utah as a team that a lot of people have forgotten about. And they finally got off of the bus of their quarterback that was there for like a decade. You know what I'm saying? But I think Cal Whittingham, and if you go look at that BYU Utah game. BYU was lucky to escape that game with a victory. Utah played them very tough, and they literally had no quarterback play at all. And I think this year, Cal Whittingham and Utah, they could be a team that could be on the verge or right there on the fringe of winning the Big 12 and then getting a berth in the playoffs. So I would say them. I'm going to go to another team that I think for a lot of reasons have been left for dead, and I just don't know why. I think Michigan could be a very scary team in the Big Ten. I really do. Everybody's talking about Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana. Hey, who beat Ohio State in the Big Ten last year? Outside of Oregon. Michigan. Who played Oregon tough for 2.5 quarters at the Big House? Michigan. And who had a chance to beat Indiana on the road? Michigan. Let me tell you something. They returned some really good defensive linemen. They lost 2 behemoths to the NFL draft, but they returned some talent, and they returned some talent at linebacker. That's one thing they developed. I think their offensive line that struggled mightily early, I think they're going to be more consistent and better. They get Justice Haynes as a running back. They're going to have a little bit of, thunder and lightning in the backfield now. And then you talk about quarterback play. Will it be the true freshman that they turn to? Right? Will it be the youngster that they allowed to sit and marinate as a redshirt freshman? But I expect that similarly to Notre Dame, they're going to have better passers at the quarterback position but they're going to be inexperienced. And I do believe in their head coach as a play caller. I have to wait and see how he grows as a head coach and a leader of a program. But specifically as calling plays and creating offense, I do believe in him as a play caller. Can we consider LSU a sleeper? I think a lot of people are out on LSU. I understand why a lot of people are out on LSU. LSU absolutely can make a run at the playoffs. And I think a lot of people have kind of like sold their LSU stock, with what Brian Kelly has done. I think he's underwhelmed. I think that's safe to say. He's underwhelmed early on at LSU, but they're a team to look out for as well. Another team I was thinking about when I was playing this out, it's very easy for me, to take my fandom and say Illinois. But Illinois is who they are. They don't have a quarterback that's going to get them over the hump. Can they steal a game against Indiana? Yeah, they had a good shot that they could steal a game against Indiana. Do I see them beating the Oregon when they face off? Nah, I don't think they're ready for that. And I think Brett beat them. So I wouldn't put them as a surprise team, even though that's my squad. And then I'll finish it off with, I'm going to be honest, I'm very intrigued by Clark Lee and whether or not if Clark Lee can get Vanderbilt to 9 to 10 wins, you might as well act like they won the World Series. Like a Vanderbilt team that won 9 to 10 games, man, that's absolutely amazing, right? So that's a sleeper team for me to watch in SEC, not from the sense of they're making the playoffs, but 9 to 10 wins at Vanderbilt is like a playoff berth for a lot of other top elite schools. So those are the teams that jumped out to me as far as surprise teams in 2025. Like you said, I don't know if we're going to have an Indiana that comes from being the absolute bottom feeder of their conference, and then they're automatically in the college football playoff. No, I don't know if I see that. I don't know if I see that.
My prediction for next season, I think you're going to find a little bit of the in-between. I don't think you're going to have a team like a Florida State that last year went 13-1, or in 2023 went 13-1, and then they go 2-10. I also think you're going to have a team like an IU that's perennially, a 5-6 win program to make in the playoffs. I don't know if you'll see it to those extremes, but I think you will see some variance. I'll start with Michigan because you and I both have those on our list. And as much as it pains me to say as a Notre Dame fan, but Michigan is a team that I have my eye on for a handful of different reasons. First, I find it extremely hard to believe that their quarterback situation is going to be worse than what it was in 2024. Whether it's Mikey Keene from Fresno State or they go with Bryce Underwood, the exciting new incoming freshman. I think that's going to be better. You touched on Justice Haynes. I think that's a phenomenal pickup. Because if there's one thing that I believe that Michigan will always just be able to do is it's run the football at a high level, and getting a guy like Justice Haynes, I think was a really good pickup. They're getting some defensive players back on top of the players that you mentioned. They're getting some players back in their secondary that they lost from injury last year early in the season. And then another guy too is, look, man, I still have some questions about Sharon Moore. I do. But he went 8-5 his first full season as a head coach, and they ended their year beating Ohio State and Columbus and Alabama in a bowl game, and in a bowl game that Jalen Milroe played in. I think that's something to note. And they did both of that without Colson Loveland and Will Johnson at corner, arguably the two best players on their team outside of Mason Graham. And so to me, I think that speaks volumes. I pay a lot of attention to how a team ends their season. That's kind of a common theme that I have going on with this list that I have put together. Another team that I have ranked on here, again, I don't know if you call them a sleeper, but here's why I put them on my list. I think Indiana is a team that you're going to have to keep an eye on again this season. Now, I know it's tough to say that like a playoff team from this last year is a sleeper team for 25, but there are a lot of people that believe they just caught lightning in a bottle and it was just one of those fluke seasons that nobody was expecting anything from them. And that could be true, but they return a lot of key pieces. And I like some of their portal pickups. They bring back Elijah Surratt. They bring back Omar Cooper. They bring back Mikhail Kamara, Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Amari Farrell. And these are all players that have experience in big moments. Those are all players that played in the Horseshoe in Columbus and played against Notre Dame at night in Notre Dame Stadium in the first round of the playoffs. And so to me, I think that's going to be huge. I really do. Now, unlike last season, we're going to know relatively quickly the level of competition that IU is going to face. Because let's be real about something here. The level of competition that they faced up until when they played Ohio State was just not good. In my opinion, it just wasn't. Michigan, I'll hear out arguments for them, but at the time, I think Michigan was, 5-4 going into that game against IU. Yes, they played Nebraska and absolutely decimated them. Nebraska was not a team that impressed me. There was a reason why that team was 4-1 going into that matchup, and they were unranked. That's how I look at it. And then outside of that, they played a bunch of nobodies. Now, you go through and you start looking at who they have on their schedule this year. And they play Illinois, they play at Iowa, they play at Oregon, they play at Penn State, and they host Wisconsin. So we're not going to have to wait long to see if Kurt Cignetti going into year 2 is going to be, okay, like, is this just kind of a standard for IU now? Are they going to be a perennial 9-10 win team every year? Or was last year a little bit of a fluke? They had some momentum with the new head coach, and they had a group of 5 all-star team that came in, and they were able to knock off some big names, but not necessarily good quality teams. Because when they did play those good quality teams, they lost, and they lost convincingly. That game against Ohio State, in my opinion, was never close. I know the final score of the Notre Dame game was 27-17. Look, IU, to make it a 10-point loss, had to score a touchdown, recover an onside kick, score a touchdown, and get a 2-point conversion to then still lose by 10 points. That game was not close. Just wasn't. I'm sorry for any resident IU people that might be in the chat today. But can they repeat that performance? Do I think that IU is going to go and compete for the Big Ten championship? No, I don't. Not when you have a conference with Penn State that returns a lot of key pieces. Ohio State's coming off of a national championship win. Oregon just won the Big Ten a year ago. And we just talked about how Michigan could be a big sleeper team. Michigan is a team that I believe could potentially, if things break out the way that they are, heading into the month of November, I think people will talk about them as a contender to play for the Big Ten championship. I don't know if they will. I don't know if they're going to win it, but I think that they could. Another team on this list for me that I have is Kansas, coming out of the Big 12. And they're an intriguing team to me. They returned Jalen Daniels. Their skilled positions were built through the portal, and I always will have question marks about that. I'm high on LSU this year because I like their receiver talent. A lot of it was through the portal, though, so I don't know how that's going to look. Now, it's not all completely built through the portal. It's similar to how Notre Dame's was. Yes, Notre Dame went to the portal last season to get Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison, but they also had Jaden Greathouse. They also had Jordan Faison, and I look at LSU similarly. Now, 3 out of Kansas's 4 final games were all upset wins to end the year. In consecutive weeks, they beat a ranked Iowa State team, a ranked BYU team, and a ranked Colorado team. I think that's huge. I think it's going to come down to how Jalen Daniels performs and if he can remain healthy throughout an entire season. But I like Lance Leopold and what he was able to do to finish Kansas's season. Because Kansas was a team that I had my eye on going into last season, and the expectation, they didn't meet them. But I am interested to see how they do this year. And like we've talked about, Shaun, I know you and Brian have talked about it. Brian and I have talked about it. You and I have talked about it. The Big 12 right now is the Wild West. Any team could come out of that league and if you told me that they're playing for the Big 12 championship, I'd believe you. Honestly, I would. If you told me that it's going to be Kansas and Arizona State, I'd believe you. So it's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be interesting. The last team that I have on this list as far as like surprise teams on the positive end is Florida. I think they get lost a little bit in the mix when talking about SEC teams because there's a question about, will Georgia be able to make its way back to its dominance? As far as I'm concerned, until they're dethroned from winning the SEC championship, they're still the team that you have to go through. Honestly, if I'm just being real about it. But that's a me personally. But can Georgia return to that big time national prowess, make a run in the playoffs like they were a couple years ago? Can Alabama return to that? You know, is Texas going to be able to finally get over that hump and beat that big name team down in the SEC and make a run in the playoffs with Arch Manning? I think those are a lot of the headlines that get taken away in the SEC. But to me, I'm keeping my eye on Florida. I like what they are with DJ Lagway. Their schedule last year was brutal, and they were able to make it out 4-4 in the SEC and 8-5 overall. Last year on their schedule, they had to play Miami out of conference, Texas A&M, at Tennessee, at Georgia, at Texas, LSU, and Ole Miss. And even with that schedule, they ended the season with 3 straight wins over LSU at home, a ranked Ole Miss at home, and FSU on the road. Now, we all know what Florida State turned out to be, but them being able to overcome that schedule and still go down into an environment like Tallahassee and come away with a win, I think that's impressive. I'm going to be interested to see what kind of step DJ Lagway takes going into year 2 as a starter. But for me, I think Florida is another team that you have to keep an eye on. And I view them similar to the conversation of what I had with IU. I don't think Florida is going to be competing for an SEC championship. I don't. But they are going to be that team for me that you kind of have to keep an eye on. You know, if you are, I don't know what their schedule is for this upcoming season, but if you are one of the teams on their schedule, they're not one of the ones that you can just go and sit and sleep through because it's going to be a battle. I mean, gosh, good Lord. Yeah, this year they play at LSU and they play at Miami in back-to-back weeks without a bye, and that's before the month of September is even over. Then they get a bye week. Then they host Texas A&M. Then they're at Kyle Field the next week. And then they play Mississippi State at home. And then they play Georgia on a neutral field. Then they're at Ole Miss a couple weeks after that. Then they host Tennessee the next week after that. So Florida's schedule this season doesn't get any easier. But I think with a more experienced roster, I like some of the transfer portal pickups that they got. They're another team to keep an eye on for me. That's for sure.
And I think a lot of this is driven by the quarterback situation, especially in the portal. When you start talking about surprise teams, I'm going to give you 3 teams that I thought about. I did give thought to Florida with DJ Lagway, right? But it just concerns me now. He had the leg injury. Now he's dealing with a shoulder. But these were teams that I thought about. I thought about, and someone said in the chat, I thought about Aiden Childs in Michigan State in the Big Ten, right? But I just thought about the difficulty and the climb of the teams and programs that they would have to get over. I don't know what that schedule looks like. I'll be very interested once I do give a look at it. John Mateer at Oklahoma was a team that I thought about. But once again, in the SEC with that schedule, really how much of a difference can he make, you know, to make them a surprise team? I also thought about a team we talked about. You get the Gronkowski kid at quarterback at Iowa, right? Are they a surprise team? Which, honestly, I probably should have given more thought to that because Kirk Ferentz has been able to do it without quarterback play and be competitive. And I don't know, he must have like some pictures of the schedule makers in the Big Ten because he always ends up getting like a schedule that he doesn't have to play 2 of the big 3. And they only have 1 major game in the regular season that puts them in the Big Ten championship or puts them in the running for the Big Ten championship. Then who else? South Carolina, I guess. I'm not. I don't fully buy the Sellers kid at quarterback. I think that's what holds me back from considering them as a true contender to be a sleeper team. Oh, Baylor. We talked about Baylor as a team to look at, right? I was very impressed with their young quarterback, Damon Williams out at Washington. That's a team to watch. But once again, just the Big Ten is extremely, extremely tough, man. It's extremely tough. And then last but not least, what do you think about Georgia Tech and Haynes King as a sleeper team? That's a team I thought about as well, but I just didn't commit to them being one of my teams to watch.
They lost a little bit too much on defense for me.
Yeah.
Because with all those defensive pieces and Haynes King and Jamal Haynes last year, they still went 7-6. Now, their schedule was pretty tough. I won't lie.
Yeah.
But they were one of the teams that I did consider. I considered Georgia Tech. Having Haynes King and Jamal Haynes back is interesting to me. I think Eric Singleton is still back there as well. I think.
Yes, you're right.
And so that is interesting to me. But defensively, they lost quite a bit. I think they return on their D-line. I think their only returning starters that Vanderberg kid. I think he comes back on their D-line. But I know they lost Zeke Biggers. There's going to be some people that I'm interested to see how they replace them. And so they're a team that I thought about. There's a couple that I did. I thought about putting USC in there. But
we're too petty to do that.
I know. We're honestly
too petty to do that right now. Let's be honest.
Oh, I know. And honestly, one of the reasons why I'm not putting them in there is I think that they're going to have a decent start to the season. They're going to go to South Bend and get worked, and then the rest of their season is going to be bad like it was in 2023. That is an honest assessment. But I do like some of the pieces that they have coming back. Jade Maeva intrigues me. In the sample size that we got to see him, he looked great against Notre Dame and didn't look the same in the bowl game. So I don't know what that's going to be like. But they bring back a couple of good receivers. I like Mekhi Lemon. I like Jacoby Lane. Those are interesting to me. I think their running back situation is going to take a step back from where it was last year. But I did think about USC. I saw somebody else put in the chat about Nebraska, and I so badly want Nebraska to be in this conversation. But every single year I do the same thing of like, hey, Nebraska could be a team to look out for, and then they end the year with 7 wins. Nebraska is very much a team to me that I have to see them do it. Which, to be fair, kind of the definition of a sleeper team is a team that you don't think that could. But I think they have the pieces to. I think that their quarterback is interesting. If he can grow and mature and continue to develop his game, I think he could be pretty good. Some of it for me is like, I think you need a specific type of head coach at Nebraska, and I don't know if Matt Rule's the guy. I don't. And so they're going to be interesting for me. But you know what? I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens with them. And then I have some sleeper teams. I don't know if they're I don't know if I would label them as sleepers, but a lot of people are labeling them as they're just going to be good. And I don't think they're going to be as good as what some people think. I think Miami's at the top of that list for me. I like Cam Ward a lot more than I like Carson Beck. And Cam Ward was left out of the playoffs and the ACC championship. And that's when they had guys like Xavier Restrepo and a good running back. And so I'm going to be interested to see what Carson Beck does with that. But I think there's a lot of people talking about how Miami could be a runaway favorite in the ACC. To that, I would say don't forget about Clemson.
I mean, they just won the championship. That's not Clemson wouldn't be a surprise to me. It would be a surprise because I think they are. You know what? It goes back to what he said on the field after they beat Notre Dame. Like if I would invest in Clemson stock, and that stock continues to ascend and go up. So it wouldn't be a surprise to me. The Dabo's done it before, and I think he's realized the things that he's had to change, and his quarterback has gotten better, and he has definitely improved the talent and the blueprint for wide receivers that are needed moving forward. More explosive wide receivers, great run after catch, something that Notre Dame's trying to do. He's done that, in the span of like 2 years. He's made moves, and I guess if you look at it, for them jumping into that tier one, I guess they could be a surprise team if they make that jump. You know, Isaac Brown and Miller Moss and Jeff Brom and what they have as weapons coming back at wide receiver. Could they be a sleeper team at Louisville? Could you consider Louisville a sleeper team? You know, if they take a step forward, get into the playoffs. It's
Louisville's
possible.
an interesting one. Yeah,
It's possible.
Louisville's interesting. One thing real quick, too. I was wrong about Georgia Tech. The Singleton kid's gone. Malik Rutherford is the receiver that they return.
Okay.
Singleton transferred to Auburn. So, yeah, I caught that in the chat. So, my bad on that one. But, yeah, my thing with Louisville, I don't know how much I trust Miller Moss. If there's one thing that I will give Lincoln Riley credit for is that guy can develop quarterbacks. I think his track record speaks for himself. And Miller Moss was a quarterback that he moved away from. It's not that I don't trust Jeff Brom, because I also think that he's a great offensive-minded coach.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that they are taking a step back going from Tyler Shuck to Miller Moss. That's just me. I think Miller Moss is more of a big name than what Tyler Shuck might have been, if I'm being honest with you. But that's just me. I don't know how much I trust Miller Moss, but they do return a lot. I love their running back room as a whole, led by Isaac Brown. I think they return Colin Lacey and Chris Bell in the receiving core. I think the only person they lost was Ja'Cory Brooks. I don't want to just say like, oh, it's just Ja'Cory Brooks, but it's not like they have a depleted wide receiver core.
Yeah.
For me, it's all going to come down to how Miller Moss can do. And I don't love Ron English as their defensive coordinator. So, but I did think about Louisville for a second. I did think about them.
Ron English comes across as a very, at times, undisciplined as a defensive coordinator, right? When he's in his bag, he's in his bag. But when you get him, you know, they have a tendency to give up some big plays and give up some points.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so that is, I understand why you feel the way about. Speaking of Ron English, his previous, someone he was connected to, North Carolina State, and their young quarterback, who I thought come in and to do what he did. I like North Carolina State to possibly be a sleeper team, not to necessarily to give some teams headaches, to really give some teams headaches. In the ACC. You know, I don't know if I trust. I don't know if I trust their overall depth and talent. But it'd be interesting. And like all of this is tied into the quarterback, man. When you start talking about surprises, CJ Bailey is definitely a reason for Wolfpack fans to feel upbeat about what they can do. They can do. I don't know if they have the defense and the talent on defense that they had 2 years ago when Notre Dame went up there and beat them. You're talking about Peyton Wilson and like the guys they had in that defensive front.
Oh, yeah.
And the secondary wasn't on the same level. But yeah, offensively, I think they have a chance to give some teams. Because I remember, I think it was Clemson. They went to Clemson, and early on in that game, you know, they were actually moving the ball with CJ Bailey. And then all of a sudden, Clemson just hit them with some big plays, got a turnover here or there. And then you know how a game can literally just turn like that.
Yeah.
And the team isn't experienced enough to really recover. But the kid competed. So he's intriguing. He's definitely intriguing. I don't really buy into them being one of those teams, but you know, it will be interesting to watch, as well will Duke, you know, with their new quarterback, you know, and
No, those are so going back down to the group of five level. One team that I'm going to keep my eye on is Navy. Honestly, they returned Blake Horvath, Eli Heidenreich, Alex Teska. They could have an Army-esque type of season, because I mean Navy got derailed. Their season kind of did a little bit after they lost. After Blake Horvath got a little banged up, and that offense just turned a little differently, But I mean, there's still a reason why they went and they played that Army team and beat them pretty convincingly, if I remember. And so I think they could be a group of 5 sleeper team for me, honestly. And then, of course, it is us also just because they're on Notre Dame's schedule. I know Boise State lost Ass and Genty, but I think that they're still going to be an interesting team for me. Maddox Madsen, I put a lot of weight into teams returning a quarterback with playoff experience.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about SMU? Where do you think that they're going to fall this season? Because they lost a little bit on defense, but they do return Kevin Jennings. I don't know how to. They're the one team that I don't know how to gauge.
Well, I think they lost a lot, but then they have a lot. We talked about Kevin Jennings last year, right? I'm interested in. I put him in my top 5 returners at quarterback because I'm interested in what he learned from that playoff experience against Penn State. That's valuable. That's valuable. My dad told me, man, you make mistakes, you learn more from your mistakes than you will from your triumphs. And so we'll see what this young man is made of. First of all, he had to win the position. Early in the year, it was a battle. And he had to win the position. He wins the position. He takes on the team. He leads them to the ACC championship game. He leads them to college football playoffs. And he has one of his worst games ever at Penn State. What does he learn from that? Who does he become? Because what you did lose, if he elevates his play, he can cover up and bring everybody else with him, because that's what you do at the quarterback position. So I'm interested in seeing if he can do that. And it would be a surprise if they follow their success up with another berth in the playoffs. I think that would be a surprise if they become a playoff team 2 years in a row. But I think it would also set a trend like, SMU might be here for the foreseeable future. I think Kevin Jennings has a chance to get better. I don't know if he's going to become elite. Do I think he's going to regress? No, I don't think he's going to regress. I think they still have talent, and I know they brought in talent at the skill positions in the recruiting class. So offensively, they should be good to go. I'm more worried about what they lost defensively.
Yep, me too.
That's what I'm more worried about. What they lost defensively and whether or not they're going to be able to replace those guys. And somebody else I'm thinking about? Look, man, I wanted the Concepcion kid the first time I saw him play against Notre Dame a couple of years ago. I was like, oh, can we get that kid? And for Texas A&M to get him and to bring back Marcel Reed and move on from Connor Wegman. Now, it's a lot of people. Marcel Reed is one of those great conversation pieces at quarterback, because either you believe in him or you don't. Either you don't think he's any good or you see some talent and say, okay, let's see what he can do, right? He came in, took over, and he was the guy that was leading the way when they were making their run and led the SEC going into that last quarter of the season. And unfortunately, teams figured him out, figured the offense out, and were able to shut the Texas A&M situation down offensively. But let's be fair, his offensive line really wasn't that good. Their running backs were thin, and we know what their wide receiving core was last year. It wasn't that good. And they were just a little bit better than the Penn State group, maybe. So, and then they did lose one of their best wide receivers, though, in the portal. I think he went to Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. So, could Texas A&M be a surprise team if they get to the playoff? Maybe.
Texas A&M is a team I'm going to keep my eye on. I do like their portal receiver class. I mean, they got that Micah Hudson kid, I don't really know what happened with him, but he was like Texas Tech's like first 5-star recruit in like school history, and then he never played. But I like the Concepcion pickup. They returned Terry Bussey. I think that one could be interesting. But to me, they return all 5 starters along the offensive line. And then they bring back – look, if Colin Klein can figure out – and honestly, he should probably watch some film of what Notre Dame did last year on offense. But if he can figure out how to get Marcel Reed, Le'Veon Moss, and Amari Daniels all kind of gelling as a running game, I don't know if they have to throw the ball all over the yard to win. I don't know how many 48-10 wins Texas A&M is going to have. You know what I mean? I don't really know what their schedule is. I'll pull that up right now. But to me, they're an interesting team. My biggest question for them is, how do you replace everything that you lost along the defensive line? That one's going to be huge. They lost Nick Scourton and then 2 of their interior defensive linemen. They lost Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, Nick Scourton. That's huge. Like that was kind of the heart and soul of their defense. But it is interesting what they do bring back on the back end. Will Lee's coming back. That one's a little bit interesting. Scooby Williams is coming back. Torian York is coming back. And so, they have some pieces to work with that I think could be interesting. But, next year you go and you look at their schedule. They're obviously at Notre Dame in September. Then they have a bye week. And then in order, they host Auburn. They host Mississippi State. They host Florida. Then they play at Arkansas, and then they're at LSU, and then until their next bye. Then they're at Missouri, home against South Carolina. And then like the SEC does, they have kind of I call it their third bye week, but then they play Samford the second to last week of the season, and then they finish up the year at Texas. So I think it could be interesting. Also, Mike Elko going into year 2 is huge. Yeah. And so I'm going to be interested to see what Texas A&M does for sure. Yeah, that's for sure.
I think Mike Elko can recruit.
Yeah,
especially down there in Texas. So they'll get some big boys, But like you said, Scourton, Turner, you lose a lot on that defensive line. Mm-hmm. A lot. A defensive line, by the way, that when the rubber met the road in the fourth quarter there, Notre Dame kind of dominated them. I'm just saying. Just like to point that out.
Yep. Just in case people forgot.
Yeah.
Yep. Just in case people forgot, Anthony Knapp kind of held his own a little bit in the run game against Nick Scourton too, I will say. Pass game, different
Not
conversation.
So
different ball. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Definitely going to be interesting. The last thing that we're going to talk about today, Shaun, is we're going to talk about the college football playoff, more specifically the future of the college football playoff. Moving forward, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the makeup of the college football playoff semifinals is going to be. And one of the things that kind of sparked this conversation is when you look at the March Madness tournament, the Final Four are all number 1 seeds. So it kind of begs the question, are we going to see that in the future of the college football playoffs? Where now, obviously, there's not multiple number 1 seeds, but is there a scenario that the Final Four teams are seeds 1, 2, 3, and 4? And essentially make it look like what the 4-team playoff format was. I have some thoughts about it. Shaun, I'll kick it over to you first. What do you say?
The chances of what we've seen this year, by the way, the last time it happened was 2008, bodes well for me as a Bulls fan because the best player in that tournament ended up being the number 1 overall pick coming to the Chicago Bulls. And I want a little bit of that pixie dust coming down on the Bulls, and we can get Cooper Flag. But I digress. One can hope. I think going chalk is actually, what's very interesting? Big picture, I look at this as the powers that be using NIL as a behind closed doors vehicle to get things to where they really want it to be. This is what you want if you're a Power 4 big time program in college basketball. You want the Sweet 16 and all the revenue to go to the big time conferences. You want the Big Four conferences to be comprised the 16 teams in the Sweet 16. That's absolutely what you want. And the reason it went that way is because of NIL, right? So as much as you complain about NIL, NCAA, it's really guiding everything in the direction of what you want. So when we talk about these surprise teams, think it not strange that most of the surprise teams we talked about came from the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC. Like, this is what the NCAA and the powers that be, this is what they really want. They really want the bulk of the 12 teams in the college football playoffs to come from Power Four conferences. That's what they want. They don't want the Cinderella story. They have no need for the Cinderella story. They want the revenue, and they want to cut out the middleman in a sense, right? So now the Indiana story, it's a great story, but do they really want that story? Or would they rather Michigan be the team that replaces Indiana in the college football playoff? So, but pointing to what you said in pre-show, Trevor, basketball is a little bit different than football. You can make more of an impact in NIL with one addition or two additions than you can say in football, right? And so when we start the conversation about football, I think the chances are more slim that you'll get chalked in the college football playoff, whereas 1, 2, 3, and 4 facing off in the semifinals. Will it ever happen? I think it will happen in the future, but the chances of it happening are far less than when we're talking about college basketball. Last year, and then, like you said, if they don't change the makeup of how those top four seeds are given out, now if they change the top four seeds to like the best 4 teams, now the chances increase, but as currently constructed, it's going to be very slim chances that happens moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you and I talked about this when we were getting ready and gearing up to start the show. And in its current format, I'm going to say no. Because you have to look at what the automatic bids mean. And you start looking at, odds are obviously we can already chalk in the winner of the Big Ten, the winner of the SEC, they're going to be 1 and 2 every year. Like, I think that's a safe assumption to make. Every single year, during the 12-team format, the winner of the Big Ten and the winner of the SEC will split seeds 1 and 2. And then you start talking about, okay, will the winner of the ACC or the winner of the Big 12, or like we saw this past year, the group of 5 automatic bid get the bye? I think in that format, I don't think you're ever going to see a 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't like to live in the world of absolutes, but in my mind, especially this past season, taking what we know of a 12-team playoff format, because we only have 1 year of a sample size to go off of, I think the third best team in the Big Ten, and I'm talking, when I mean third best team in the Big Ten, I'm talking like per the conference rankings. Like, I think Ohio State was the third best team in the Big Ten, but like, I don't think that they were the third best team in the Big Ten. They won the national championship and absolutely slaughtered the Big Ten champions in the Rose Bowl. But with that being said, I think that a Notre Dame, a third-place team in the Big Ten, a second-place team in the Big Ten, a second-place team in the SEC is just going to be better than who the Big 12 or the group of 5 automatic bid is going to be if they are elected to get the bye. And so that's how it is for me. And I believe that for a couple of reasons. One, you talked about the difference in like basketball and football. And yeah, like you could get one player in basketball and that changes the landscape of your whole team. Prime example, look at Davidson when they had Steph Curry. They don't have Steph Curry. They're not making a run to the Elite Eight. They might not make the tournament. Who knows? But they had Steph Curry, and we all know what happened. Football's a completely different game, and I think the difference lies in the trenches. Deion Sanders talked about how when he was at Jackson State, he got asked in an interview once, like, hey, man, like, why don't you move up a level? Like, you're dominating everybody down here. And he said, well, because our skilled positions are not a key indicator of our ability to compete at the FBS level. It's the trenches. That's the biggest difference, offensive and defensive line. And that is carried over to his story at Colorado. What can Colorado not do? Run the football and stop the run. There was no question mark if Shedeur Sanders could tear up a secondary. There's no question if Travis Hunter was a good lockdown corner. I don't think there was any question about that. I did have questions if they would stop a team from rushing for 175 yards a game. I did have questions of if Colorado could have a 100-yard rusher. What was the biggest difference when you watched an IU play a team like like a Rutgers or a Maryland, and then when they went and played Ohio State and Notre Dame? The difference was in the trenches because IU wasn't able to run the ball effectively like they could. IU had a really good rush defense, but again, I had a lot of stories, and we talked about it a lot when the playoff game was happening. I believe that a lot of those stats for their rush defense were padded a little bit by some of the level of opponents that they played. Me personally, but you can go back and look at the numbers, and it kind of backs that up. So that is why I'm a firm believer that I don't believe that in the current state of the playoffs, it's going to be a 1, 2, 3, and 4 seed. I could see it some years being like a 1, 2, and 3. This upcoming year could be a good indicator of that. I'm really high on Clemson this season. So you could have a scenario where, the Big Ten winner is like a Penn State who has a lot of returning pieces, or it's an Ohio State coming off of a national championship win, or Oregon repeats. You have an SEC winner. Maybe it's Georgia again. Maybe Alabama returns to that stage. Maybe it's Texas. Maybe Texas finally gets that win. So you're looking at a scenario where the 1 and 2 seed is one of those, and the 3rd seed could be Clemson with all the experience that they have coming back. I could see it then maybe the semifinals is 1, 2, and 3. But again, I don't see one of the Big 12 champion or the Group of 5 champion knocking off a Notre Dame, the Big 10 runner-up, or the SEC runner-up. I don't see that happening. Now, once they move to the 16-team format, depending on how they do the seeding, and once they get to, okay, because this year it was weird, like your ranking was not your seed because of what happens in the conference championship and all that other stuff. But I do think it's going to be interesting if once they get to 16 teams, if it's just going to be, hey, if you're ranked number 1 in the final playoff rankings, you're the number 1 seed. Now, stuff's going to have to happen with the conference championships. And in the direction that they're heading, I don't know if that's going to be a thing in the next 3 to 5 years. Who knows? But I could see a scenario like that where if your true ranking is your seed, I could see that being a lot more of a thing. But up until that point, for those reasons, I don't see in a true 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, honestly, Trev, the simple answer is Notre Dame can't get a top 4 seed, so it'll never be 1, 2, 3, 4 because we're always going to be in the Final Four. It's as simple as that.
Look, man,
that's as simple as that. Homer hypothesis. That's what I think about it. Notre Dame is always going to be in the top 4, so in the semifinals. So therefore, by default, we can't get a top 4 seed, so it will never be scratch or never be chalk when it comes to college football.
I mean, look, man, until proved differently. Like I said, it's a 1-year sample size, but
it is.
Notre Dame, with the trajectory of the program that they're on, I think that they're always going to be in that mix. But then again, like the same could be said for whoever the 2nd and 3rd place teams are in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, would it surprise you? Like, let's just play out this hypothetical scenario. Would it surprise you?
Go ahead. I'm glad you said that. Go ahead.
Yeah, like, would it surprise you at all if, like, let's say in the current ranking system and how teams are seated now, would it surprise you if once again, let's say Ohio State and Penn State play in the Big Ten championship this year, and Penn State loses again to Ohio State. And then Penn State goes and they play the winner of the Big 12 and they play BYU in the quarterfinals. Would it surprise you at all that Penn State wins that game?
Not at all.
It's same could be said about the SEC. Like, let's just say Texas plays Alabama and Steve Sarkisian can't get it done again. And Texas is playing, in the quarterfinals. They're playing, I'm trying to think of the group of 5 that could get an automatic bye. Like, let's just say, just because we're having fun here, let's say it's Navy. Let's say Texas goes and plays Navy because Navy got the group of 5 automatic bid, and for whatever reason, the Big 12 champion was ranked below them in the standings. Would it surprise you in the slightest that Texas beats Navy in the quarterfinals? Like, that's how I view it.
No.
And to me, I think it rests on the shoulders of, at least this upcoming season, the Big 12 and the group of 5. Because we've said before, one of the reasons why the Big 12 is so fun to watch is they're playing on an even playing field. But that playing field isn't on the same level as the top tier teams in the SEC and the Big 10. And so that to me is the biggest differentiator, Shaun. That's what it is for me.
Yeah, I think you were spot on with that. And I think eventually, they'll learn. I think not having the 4 seeds pretty much lose before you get to the semifinals kind of spark the conversation to pick up concerning expanding to 16, right? Because at the end of the day, they want the big boys in the semifinals, right? And the truth of the matter, they had Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame. I mean, you can't. Who would you take out? Out of those 4, who would you take out that make it bigger? Maybe throw a Georgia in there. Maybe, selfishly add another SEC team. But yeah, we saw Georgia Notre Dame play the round before in the quarters. So look, I don't foresee it happening, like you said. I just don't. Would it be super dope? Maybe. But I think having games like Arizona State taking Texas to the brink of disaster, that would have been a disastrous loss for Sark and Texas if they'd allowed Arizona State to complete the comeback and win that game. I don't think it was disastrous for Georgia to lose to Notre Dame. I think it made everything more intriguing, right? Because Notre Dame is that team, either you love them or hate them. And that drives up revenue, that drives up eyes, because everybody's going to come to see. It's like Floyd Mayweather. Everybody's going to come to see what happens, regardless of what you think about him. We want to see him win. We want to see him lose. And we're all watching the same thing. That's Notre Dame.
Oh, 100%.
That is Notre Dame.
100%. I mean, why did Alabama pull crazy numbers from like 2012 to like 2020?
Same thing.
Like I watched almost all of Alabama's big games, and I'm not a roll tide roll guy. I just wanted to watch them lose. That's why you tune in. Like, that's why I watched the Iron Bowl when Auburn was relevant, and they knew it. That's why I watched Alabama, Texas in 2023. I want to see if Texas could do it.
Yeah.
That's why I would always watch the SEC championship. Could Georgia do it? You know what I mean? It's stuff like that. And so, I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, the final piece of this conversation, Shaun, is just what will that combination of the top 4 be? And we've talked about it a little bit already, but I think until shown otherwise, I think it'll be, either, 2 teams from the SEC or 2 teams from the Big 10. Yeah. And then 1 team from either the SEC and 1 team from the Big 10 and Notre Dame. With the trajectory that this program is on, I fully believe that. And people can call it a homer take if you like. But Notre Dame went into the playoffs last year and they beat the SEC champs. I have all the reason to believe that as of today. Now, who knows what happens as the season goes on, or injuries or transfer portal issues, or who gets hot at the right time. Because, again, with an expanded playoffs, that is some of it. Ohio State got hot at the right time. Nobody was thinking about talent of the roster aside. After they lost to Michigan at home for the 4th straight year, nobody's like, man, I can't wait to watch the Buckeyes hoist the trophy. Nobody was thinking that.
Yeah.
People were thinking that after Georgia with a backup quarterback beat Texas in the SEC championship. People were thinking that after watching Oregon go 13-0.
Yeah.
And so that to me is, I mean, some people were even thinking that about Notre Dame. They just rattled off 10 straight wins and beat IU at home in the first ever college football playoff game. Who knows how that's going to roll out? That's why the Georgia Notre Dame game was so big. Yeah. But I think from here on out, it's just going to be some sort of combination of that. I think the worst possible case scenario is you get like 3 teams from the same conference in the finals, depending on how the rankings and seeding shape out. Like, I think that could be what would because then you run the risk of a rematch from the regular season in the semifinals. Like, I don't know if anybody would want to watch an Ohio State, Penn State semifinal game outside of people in Columbus and people in,
you know what I mean? Almost ended up being the national championship.
I know. I know.
They're very close. I think if you get something like that this year, though, like you said, I think you mentioned it. You're talking about Texas, Ohio State, Clemson. Yeah, I mean, if you get an undefeated team from the Big 12, maybe that's the 4th team. Maybe that's the route to getting it this year. I don't see a team in the Big 12 running the table, though, but
this year is my prediction to where you could see the closest thing to it and having a 1, 2, and 3 in the semifinals.
Yep.
If Clemson shapes out the way that a lot of people believe them to be, myself included.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds this year. So
I'm right there with you.
Well, folks, that is going to do it today for the RTCF show on Monday. We're all hoping and praying for Brian and hoping that his power comes back on. Luckily, him and Ange and the dogs, they're all good. I know the storm and the bad weather hit up north pretty rough. We had some thunderstorms down here in Indianapolis, but it wasn't like anything that northern Indiana and southern Michigan face. So if you guys do live up around that area, hope everything's continuing going well for you guys. Hopefully the power for Brian kicks back on here pretty soon, because I know he's chomping at the bit to get back in and talk some Notre Dame football and some college football. But Shaun, today, always a pleasure doing a show with you, my friend.
Hey, my man. Thank you guys so much. Notre Dame fans, IB Nation, as always, lock in. Big week in recruiting. Make sure you go to the boards. We'll have updates on how things are going with kids and dropping articles all week long leading up to the day we've all been waiting for, to finally see these quarterbacks on Saturday afternoon. So lock in over at boardsirishbreakdown.com for all your recruiting updates.
You heard it here first. Go check out the Champions Lounge on the premium message boards. But ladies and gentlemen, before you get out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you watch this on, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review, whether that's on Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. Enjoy the rest of your night. I think IB Nation Sports Talk will be live today at 5. I'll have to double check that, but it's a great reason to have your notification bell hit so you know whenever Irish Breakdown goes live. So until the next time, that's Shaun Davis. I'm Trevor Trowbridge. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.